Terrance Yeakey. This is a big kind of odd element of the whole story, and I think it's kind of what gets people going a little bit. So he was one of the first responders on the scene on the day of the bombing. He then winds up like a year later committing suicide under like pretty suspicious circumstances. So I don't. You can probably tell us. You probably know a lot more about it than I do.
Yeah, Terry Yeakey, that's one that a lot of the folks, when they look at this case, they like to talk about that one because it really is a compelling story. He's a police officer in Oklahoma City, and he was indeed one of the first. He was the first one to arrive at the Murrah building, and he within minutes of the bombing, and he assisted in rescue and recovery efforts and saved several people that day. And indeed, it was about a year later, he was found dead in a field. He had both of his wrists were slit, his neck was cut open, and he had a bullet wound in his head, right up here above the temple. And so he's found just obviously murdered and left in a field, and it was almost immediately declared a suicide. And interestingly enough, it was turned into a federal investigation almost immediately, handed over to the FBI. And people find that to be suspicious. And, at the time, his ex-wife, Tanya Yeakey, she's talked about this since then. And she's talked about all of the kind of the harassment she faced after Terry was murdered. And she's talked about how suspicious it was and how he did say that there were things about the bombing that he felt we were being lied to about. And he was questioning the bombing and various aspects of it. And then he was carrying out an investigation. And she talked about how he faced a lot of pushback from his superiors in the police department. For example, when he filed his report for his activities that day, he had to file a report detailing kind of what he did in response to the bombing because he was participating in these rescue efforts. Well, he turned in like a 9-page report, and evidently it had content in it that his superiors found objectionable because they went back and they told him he had to rewrite it and he had to resubmit a single-page report only and to leave out certain details, and that very much upset him. So he's a person who we know was a vocal critic of the bombing, was doing some sort of investigation on his own and felt we were being lied to about something. And so it's very unusual that he's found dead in a field in what clearly looks like murder. This guy's got both of his wrists are slit, and when his body is found, there was
his throat is
inside of the
as
wounds.
Well, right?
His neck.
Essentially, the official story is that he like pulled over beside a farm, slashed his wrists and his neck, then ran out into a field,
right,
and then shot himself in the head,
and then took out his weapon and holds it up here and shoots
like
himself in the top of the head at a 45-degree angle. And after he supposedly did that after he slit both wrists and his neck, and he would have, bled out by that point probably. And they, find him with dirt inside of the wounds, which is indicative of a body having been dragged, and it gets dragged through the dirt, and the dirt goes into those wounds. So clearly his body was dragged to the location that it was found. He also had wounds like that would indicate that you have handcuffs or flexicuffs on.
Yeah.
So this was found on his wrists, and so very much it does look like a murder.
Okay, and you believe that that's likely the case?
I believe it's a certainty that Terry Yeakey was murdered. Absolutely.
Okay, and so do you have any inclination of who might have done that? Because
that's
it seems
difficult. Yeah.
Well, that's the weird thing, right? Because it seems like you don't really, from the John Doe 2 thing, it doesn't seem like necessarily this is like, inside job or whatever. It just seems like they were trying to get some sort of victory here and prosecute Timothy McVeigh and get some sort of justice. But then the Terrance Yeakey thing kind of throws a wrench in that, because then you now have these two things. And if you try and, I guess, reconcile them together, you're like, well, how could these now be related? And that's, I think, maybe where the conspiracy people start getting into like, well, is something else going on?
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any theories as to the Terrance, that angle?
Well, it's hard for me to reconcile that because when I think about it, and I think that Tim McVeigh was a neo-Nazi and he knew people within the neo-Nazi underground, when you look at that, you do not think that this is an organization that would be capable of arranging for the murder of a police officer and then making it look like a suicide and getting full cooperation of the FBI and law enforcement. That's not something that white supremacists are capable of. That's
I'd
something
agree. Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that does tend to cause me to believe that there's something else going on here that we're not aware of. And it certainly points towards some type of maybe an intelligence operation, even. It's hard to know for sure, but it definitely is suggestive of something like that.
Okay. But nothing has come forward like any sort of kind
We
of
don't have
evidence.
any sort of evidence that would tell us. Pretty much it's just been speculation. A lot of people think that it was the FBI because Terry was going to meet with, well, he told Tanya that he was going to meet with a couple of federal agents that day. He had previously put in a job application to work for the FBI, and he wanted to transition to go from the police department to the FBI academy. And evidently, he was supposedly going to meet with a couple of feds that he may have known regarding presenting them with evidence that he had gathered in terms of the Oklahoma City bombing. And he had these questions about it, and he had this evidence he was gathering. And I just think if that were the case, he really picked the wrong people to go to. He's thinking these people are probably only 100% good, and they have what's good in mind, and he's doing the right thing. But he may have, I think, ended up meeting with the wrong people that day.